Welcome to the recorded version of Helping Seniors with Finances, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
Okay, our presenter today is Molly Carpenter. Author, speaker, trainer, and family caregiver, Molly Carpenter brings years of personal and professional senior care experience and training to families dealing with dementia care. In her current role, Molly works with a team responsible for ensuring that the Home Instead Senior Care Network's 60,000 caregivers worldwide have the resources necessary to effectively provide quality care in the home and understand the importance of their work enhancing the lives of those they serve. Molly holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Family Science with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a master's degree in education with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to our presenter, Molly Carpenter. Thanks again for being with us today, Molly.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for that warm welcome and introduction. And welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. It's such a pleasure to be with you again this month. And as Steve was noting, we have a few of these left this year. I can't believe we're already in October, and hope you're all enjoying this wonderful fall weather. Today we're going to talk about helping seniors with finances, and really it's about helping families cope with seniors' finances and help seniors with their finances. And so we're going to go into depth in this topic, and I would like to start with the objectives on the next slide. We're going to first talk about communication tips for families. I like to start with communication in case somebody does have to drop off or leave, because really it's such an important part of these discussions and these webinars is really helping families communicate with each other and with their senior loved one on these important topics. We're also going to look at some of those key financial documents that families should be prepared to get organized and pulling together, and even thinking about pulling together a professional team to help with those documents and all of these topics that we'll cover today. We're going to also look at options for financing care. Right? This is a very hot topic, and it's a question we get all the time, and I'm sure you're all getting it over and over in your day and your weeks. And so let's review some of those financing options. And then because we talk about seniors, we have to talk about money management. We have to talk about fraud prevention. Unfortunately, the senior population, they can be vulnerable and become victims of fraud. So we'll review a few tips on how to prevent those things and what signs to look for, so again, that we can help families with these tough financial situations and conversations. So like I said, I love to start with communication, and so on the next slide, I want us to start thinking about how we can communicate and how we talk to families about finances and how they should broach the topic with their loved ones. It's very sensitive, this topic, and it's sensitive because family caregivers, they're in a different role now. They're used to being the ones being taken care of by their parents or their loved one or whoever the family member is. And so now they're kind of switching roles, and that's really tough and especially when we're talking about these kind of situations, it's getting the communication right is the key. And so again, I always start with this because if you take one thing away, it'll be on tips for helping these families have these conversations. Now, we have created an acronym that we use a lot in everything that we do, and it's called ACT, and it stands for Assess, Consider, and Talk, as you can see on the slide. So let's break this down a little bit and go through each of those. When we talk about assess, it's really important for families to understand their senior loved ones' plans and wishes. They need to understand the current situation to start off with, all the way from their living situation to their health, understanding what potential challenges could come in the future, and really understanding what is their vision for aging? How do they want to age and retire and live out their last years? What are their plans? How do they see things? And I got to share a great story with you. A lot of you know, and even as Steve mentioned, I have a lot of clinical background as well, and I used to work in a community that had multiple levels of care from assisted living to nursing care. And I visited with families, that was my job. That's all I did was visit with families about their situation. And I've got to share this story because it was simply amazing to me. I had a mother and daughter proactively come in and visit with me one day. They were putting together an aging plan, which, again, is very, very amazing in our industry. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking, boy, that's never happened to me. It's only happened to me twice. But this family came in, and what they had done was really assess the mom's situation. Her name was Esther. And Esther was there and the daughter, Julie, and they had assessed the situation. They had thought about Esther's house. It was a really old home and really big, which required a lot of upkeep. And although Esther was in fantastic health now at a young age of 73, she knew that dementia was in her family. And Esther said, I just don't want to be a burden on my family. And she wanted to get everything in order. So the mother and daughter were assessing the situation. They had thought about her current living situation. They thought about her health in the future, and this was their plan. But when they came to see me, that is when they were in the sort of consider phase of this communication. They were trying to look at options, trying to understand the options, and try to understand the cost of everything. So Julie and Esther had actually been to a financial planner, and their planner is the one who encouraged them to do visits because it would give them a sense of the cost. Because it's one thing to put a plan together and say, I want to be at home for as long as possible and have home care, but then when I need to move, I want to move to assisted living. That's a great start, and it's a great plan. But for peace of mind's sake, Esther wanted to be able to picture where she was living, and she wanted to feel secure that she had enough money for the options that she wanted. So they were out doing the second part of this, and that's considering all of their options, which, again, I know you're probably all shaking your heads. This never happened. It really did happen. I love it when these families are proactive. And I think the point of today's webinar and this whole series is we are out there creating more proactive families, right? So after assessing and considering, they were going to go home and talk out the situation. They wanted to understand the option. They looked at all the situation, and they didn't tell me at the time, but I don't know if they were going to go home together and talk this out or if they wanted to think about it on their own and then come together. It's entirely up to families. But the third step is really talking it out and making sure everybody understands the plan and understands, how the finances will work and what is going to happen. So talking is the hardest part of all of this. And so if you can keep that simple acronym in mind when you're visiting with families, just to encourage those two beginning steps will go a long way. On the next slide, let's look at some of the tips you can share with families as they are having these conversations. So again, we talked about how the family caregiver is in a unique situation. They're now caring for their parent when they're used to being cared for by their parents. So this is a tough transition time for a lot of family caregivers. But it's important for them to remain helpful and positive. And that's where empathy comes into play. We have to encourage these families to put themselves in their parents' shoes. Now, this is a lot easier said than done, of course, but family caregivers, their heart is always in the right place. They're always trying to help, and they're really trying to ensure that their parent or loved one is safe, and that's usually their main goal and number one concern, which is why this is hard to talk about. A family caregiver, if they can take a step back and put themselves in their loved one's shoes, the tone of the communication will change. I go back to my story about Julie and Esther. And again, I'm observing this now. Julie didn't tell me that, but I think she understood why her mom wanted to put these things in order. And I think she put herself in her mom's shoes and kind of went along with this plan of figuring everything out. And Julie told me that she was concerned about dementia in the future and memory loss, and she didn't know what was going to happen. So Julie was trying to take that daughter was trying to take that same idea of really trying to understand where her mom was at with this whole situation. Now, listening is another key point when we're visiting with families, encouraging them to really listen when they're talking to their family member. Even when they're talking about tough issues or they're talking about anything, a lot of times we think we have the answers and we just want to go in and fix it and do it. But when you talk about these topics, listening is going to pave the way to success. Listening will help them pick up on cues and clues on really how the person's feeling and really better equip them on how to handle the situation. Body language can also have a big impact on the situation. When you're having these conversations, it's so important to stay relaxed and calm. This shows on their face, on their posture, and in their tone of voice, everything. So I guess when we close up here talking about communication, we just need to encourage families to take that time to assess and do the considering, look at the options before talking, and when they do begin talking, to keep some of these things in mind as they're having these tough conversations with the person they're caring for about the finances. Now, communication is the hardest part, but there are some key documents that can help families provide a better peace of mind for them, for the family caregiver themselves and the senior, when the topic of finances comes to mind. When these key documents are in place, it can relieve a lot of stress on the relationship and the conversation. So let's look at those key documents and review those on the next slide. As you are aware, managing estate and financial affairs is vital to a senior loved one's physical and financial health, so making sure their investments are protected and everything's in order from insurances and making sure taxes are being paid, this is going to save a family many, many future headaches, which I'm sure you've all heard a lot of those stories about when things aren't in order, what can happen. Waiting until there is an emergency or a crisis to get all this paperwork or get it started or get it finished, this could delay in care. If we're waiting to understand who's in charge to make healthcare decisions, if we're can't move forward to make those decisions until the paper's in order, I mean that's a very, very major concern. Or maybe the paperwork's not in order to release funds that could help support families or the care in these types of situations. So there's 5 documents I want to talk about today that can really assist seniors in a medical or financial emergency, as well as ease the distribution of the estate at the time of death of the person. Now, you're probably already familiar with these, but let's just review them just to give a sense. And I know a lot of you are familiar with these things, but as we talk through them and I give a simple definition, that's just one idea of how you might share what this is to a family caregiver too. So I know a lot of you know these things, but it's always good to just hear a different way that it's explained so that that's the way you could share it with a family caregiver when you're talking to them. So we start with the medical directive or the living will or advanced healthcare directive. There's a lot of different words to describe a living will. But basically, this document sets out what kind of care the patient wants to receive if and when they become ill or incapacitated. This is also where the do not resuscitate order is discussed, or the DNR. This is where ventilator usage might be noted, or artificial nutrition, feeding tubes, artificial hydration, maybe organ donation. So it's a pretty important document, and it's really, as you're talking with families, this is probably one of the most important documents that needs to be available and done before anything critical happens. The second is the durable power of attorney, or power of attorney for health care, which most of the time includes a HIPAA release as well. A durable power of attorney for healthcare allows the caregiver to make healthcare decisions for their senior loved one. And the HIPAA release gives the family caregiver access to the senior's health records and access to talk to physicians, et cetera, et cetera. Again, a very important piece of paper, a few pieces of paper to have on hand. Now, the third is the durable power of attorney for finances, which allows the caregiver to manage their senior loved one's financial affairs, pay bills, sell property, and all of those different things while their loved ones are still alive. And it's interesting, a lot of people have asked me over the years, should the same person have the durable power, the healthcare one, the durable power of attorney for healthcare as well as for finances. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that question. I think that's just a matter of a family preference. And I think I've seen it both ways, and it works in both ways. So I guess when people ask me that, I actually ask a few related questions. Are you comfortable making healthcare decisions, or would somebody else be more comfortable doing that versus financial decisions? So, it just sort of depends on the family on that one. Now, the fourth is a revocable living trust, or we could just call it a living trust, which allows the senior to retain control over their estate. And basically what it is the senior can designate what property, such as their home, investments, jewelry, anything like that, it goes into a trust, and then the senior acts as the executor for their own living trust during their lifetime. Now, a revocable trust has an important advantage. It allows the estate to avoid probate at the time of death. So a person would need to name trustees and beneficiaries. But again, the person doing the living trust is the executor until death. That's when the trustees take over. So what is the difference between a living trust and a will? Well, a trust is often prepared for people concerned with privacy and avoiding probate. And while trust serves as, it has a purpose, and in some circumstances, for most people with modest estates, wills are quite adequate. Wills are less complicated and less expensive than a trust. So a trust is really for people that have a substantial estate, a lot of property, maybe some very important investments in jewelry, things like that. So the last document we'll talk about is the will. Now, a will makes clear who will receive the senior loved one's assets and their personal property. A properly written will helps to avoid disagreements over the estate and all the property after the parent's death or the person's death. Wills have limitations, though. In particular, the beneficiary designations on financial accounts, insurance policies, and other assets can take precedence over wills. So it's really important to make sure the beneficiary designations are up to date and reflect the person's wishes. I think this is one of those really important points to make when with an insurance policy, for example, if the spouse of the person is named as the beneficiary, that comes before what is said in the will. So if in the will it says the kids are going to get this, but on the beneficiary it says that the spouse will get it. So that's just an important note to make, that to make sure the beneficiaries line up with what is in the will. This is another thing to talk about. I mean, this leads right into our next point about this is hard to navigate, and this is such important documents, and there's just, families break up over these documents. So this is so important. So it might be a good thing to consider or encourage families to have a financial management team, pull a team together to talk about these issues. So let's look at what would make up a financial team on the next slide. Now, in order to make sure everything's in order, the family should work together to organize the team, and it absolutely should include an attorney. The attorney can help with legal matters and help execute all of those financial documents and those key legal documents that we just talked about on the last slide. A financial planner or an investment counselor is another important member of a team. The family should, of course, make sure, does the senior already have one? Do they have an advisor? Have they had one their whole life? And if they don't, you've got to help them find an advisor. And it's important when doing that to look for somebody that's a certified financial planner or a CFP. And the CFP group, they have a website that is regulated by the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. And the great thing about this site is that you can check certification status of a planner, and you can also read reviews about the different planners. And I think that's just an important thing to note because there's so many scams these days, and you've all seen these seminars with salespeople selling different investments and sign up for this and that and the other. And so what happens, this site can help you determine, is this a credible scam? Is this not scam? Is this an incredible seminar, or is this a person that is certified? Is there any reviews on them? So on and so forth. Now, if the senior loved one or the senior does have an advisor, it's just important for families to meet that person, really go to the different meetings, check on statuses on a regular basis, and make sure that that advisor has them in appropriate investments. The other thing is that a financial planner can assist with making determinations about health and medical funding options. So a financial planner is a very important person on this team. The next member that I would encourage families to include is an insurance counselor. Now, beyond health insurance, the caregiver can ask the counselor about long-term care insurance, for example, whether their parents have enough insurance. Do they need additional life insurance? Some big questions like that. The insurance counselor can also provide guidance on investment vehicles and work with the investment advisor to see if any of the opportunities that they're presenting make sense. So again, that's why this is a team approach. It's also good to be a team approach because with 2 or 3 professionals involved, or even 4, it's a sort of a checks and balance system automatically because they all know enough about this stuff to be dangerous. They just all have one area of expertise. So it's great when you do have a team pulled together because they can sort of check each other. It's a great system. Then the last, professional to add to this management team or financial management team would be a CPA or a tax professional or tax advisor. It's so easy to get tripped up on all of the tax laws. They change often, and it's important to have somebody on the team that understands all the rules and regulations around the taxes. Now, a senior loved one, for example, they might be receiving certain funds or payouts, but that might require them to pay quarterly tax payments. And if those aren't paid in a timely fashion, the senior could be subject to penalties, and it could deplete resources faster. Also, if they are part of getting funds or payouts and they're deferring the taxes till later, that's really hard to understand. And so at some point, somebody's going to have to pay the taxes. So it's really important to have this professional there to understand when they should stop deferring and start paying on the taxes and start paying those taxes off. So the cost of hiring a tax professional is wise over paying, it pays for itself over paying for fines and penalties that could have been avoided. And it lessens stress, and it could avoid having to be audited by the IRS. So lots of benefits to including a tax professional in on this financial management team. Okay. Now that you know how to advise families on lining up professionals team and we've talked about the key documents, let's switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about the cost of care on the next slide. Now, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 70% of people age 65 and older will require some type of long-term care during their lifetime. And 75% of people age 85 and older have a long-term care need right now today. So in other reports and studies, I've seen this number higher due to chronic conditions. So that this number, you can read it a couple different places and see that it's all in that general range, but I've seen it higher than 70%. Now, the other factor is that spending on long-term care is expected to increase nearly 4 times. And by 2040, it's supposed to be around $380 billion. And so understanding the cost of care is so important. There's a lot of studies and resources that help families navigate the average cost of care. One place I go often is Genworth. They have a great website that does a study every year that shows the national median cost of assisted living, skilled nursing, all of those different things, all of the different avenues for long-term care. AARP also has a cost of care calculator. Now, don't worry about jotting these down. They're on the resources pages at the end of this webinar, but just a couple to bring up to mind already. But as I've said, people are drastically underestimating the cost of care. And I actually am in a program, in a university program right now, and I wrote a paper about the cost of care last semester. So I could go on and on and on about this, but I'm pretty sure a lot of you are aware that most people do not understand how much it costs, and they just assume that Medicare and Medicaid pays for everything. And I'm actually picturing you social workers out there right now having this conversation several times a day with families. I just know you are. And so debunk the myths. I know you are all doing that already as you're having the conversation, but bring it up proactively in conversations. We've got to get the word out that Medicare and Medicaid cannot pay for everything, cannot pay for the $380 billion of long-term care. And we just need to encourage families to use the tools and understand the cost of care. And that leads me into the next slide, and my next point is when they understand the cost of care, how are they going to pay for the cost of care? So let's look at that on the next slide. Again, every family I've ever talked to, they just sort of assume that Medicare and Medicaid are going to pick up the bills. And studies and articles indicate that people have not even thought about it, or they just assume the government's going to pick up the bill. So let's talk about some of the options, and we're going to talk about, obviously, the options that are self-insuring or the private pay and how people can afford this. Long-term care insurance probably is, one of the biggest ways, and it's becoming an increasingly popular way of funding elder care. 8 million Americans are now covered under these policies, and the actual plans can be written in a variety of ways to provide a range of benefits. So when a family is considering these plans, the caregiver can enlist the help of that financial management team and to really help them understand insurance and the cost and everything that is associated with long-term care. They might also ask you guys out there, geriatric care managers, your social workers, they might get advice. But the other thing that we can do is again, encourage them to look at some of those cost of care calculators so they can understand how much they are going to need. The other thing is, back to my story about Julie and Esther. Esther knew what she wanted to do. She wanted to live at home as long as she possibly could. But if the time came, she was going to move into assisted living, and then she didn't know, she was just investigating. So if Esther was going to go get a long-term care insurance policy, she would want to make sure that there was a point in there or some coverage for home care as well. So it's just really important that when people go in with long-term care insurance, they know what they want to do as they age, and they know how much things are going to cost. Now, let's talk a little bit about Medicare and Medicaid. Again, I know a lot of you know all about these programs. You know probably a lot more than I do, but I just want to do a brief overview, again, of the two programs so that if you have to simply tell a family what involves each one, the way I talk about it, maybe this would be helpful to use when you're talking to a family. So they are both entitlement programs. However, Medicare is not need-based like Medicaid. So Medicare is deemed the health insurance plan for seniors. And to qualify, a person had to either pay into Social Security through employment for 40 quarters or more, or the railroad retirement system. If they were part of the railroad, they're automatically get Medicare as well. Now, the thing about Medicare, it was not designed to pay for chronic conditions, and that's what a lot of seniors are needing. It was designed for acute care episodes. And there's two parts, Medicare A and B. A is considered the hospital insurance, and it covers inpatient stays, skilled nursing care, and hospice care. Part B was designed as a supplement insurance and is voluntary. Now, this program requires individuals to pay a monthly fee that covers physician services, labs, tests, durable medical equipment, physical therapies and occupational therapy, some of those therapeutic services. Now, the senior generally has to make a co-payment for part of those services, but many seniors have privately funded policies called Medigap policies to supplement that Medicare. Now, there's like 10 standardized policies under Medigap. So it's really important to review each policy and pick the one, again, that's right for the person's situation. Let me give you one example. Some policies cover medical emergencies overseas while others do not. So if you have a senior who's buying a Medigap policy and they never travel overseas or they never travel, period, like I would picture my grandma, I would never pick the one that had that extra coverage in there for medical emergencies overseas because you would never use it. So again, it's sort of like long-term care insurance. You've got to understand the senior, how they want to age and what their plan is, and then they pick the according policy. Now, a newer alternative to the Medigap policies are Medicare Advantage plans. This is a private insurance alternative to Medicare's traditional deductible and co-payment system, and it doesn't require a Medigap policy. So the Medicare Advantage plans have a small monthly premium. It's typically less than a Medigap premium, and Medicare Advantage plans can add services that aren't usually covered by Medicare, such as dental and vision, and getting coverage from all one source is very helpful. But the thing about the Medicare Advantage plans that people have to look at is the network, because they are within certain networks, and so depending on the person's doctor, that could be restricted depending on the policy. So it's just another thing to consider and look at. Now, when we talk about Medicaid, it's always confused with Medicare because they're both health care programs, and they're both entitlement programs. Okay, so they're easily confused, but Medicaid is means tested. They're designed to help the poor of all ages, including the elderly. And for those over 65, it will help pay for nursing home costs once they have exhausted most of their means. Typically, Medicaid eligibility comes into play after a family spends down a senior's assets. And the laws, the federal and state laws have changed in recent years to really restrict and penalize families that spend down artificially, maybe giving a lot of money away to the family or doing other things with the money. So there are new laws that are in there to protect from that happening. Okay, so we've discussed some ways that seniors can finance long-term care. Obviously, self-payment, long-term care insurance, and then the government does pay for lots of those services. They just need to supplement some of those, supplement Medicare or Medicaid. So let's discuss how caregivers can help their parents manage day-to-day finances on the next slide. Now, when we're talking to families about money management, again, when you talk about money to anybody, it's a touchy subject. So especially when a daughter or a son or a neighbor is now talking to a senior that they've cared for or are caring for right now. So when there's just some little things to note and some tips to share with families. Number one, when caregivers are visiting the senior, do they notice unopened bills? Do they notice a desk that might be in disarray or bank statements that are unopened or piling up? That is a clue that perhaps it's time to start helping the person with day-to-day management of finances. Now, if the person agrees, the caregiver can get permission to access their online banking, bill paying, and financial management materials. Taking care of these tasks are pretty easy when it's online banking because the caregiver can do it from the comfort of their own home, and it may provide some relief for their senior loved one now that somebody else is managing their money. Now, the other thing is that caregivers will need to arrange a visit to banking institutions with the parents to fill out the forms that okay them for doing the money management. That's where that durable power of attorney comes into play. And it allows them to have access to the accounts and make changes on the senior's behalf. If a senior parent is intent on managing their own, the caregiver shouldn't argue, but instead try to find solutions to work for all of them. Now, this could be where that financial team comes into play. What if, for example, the parents are willing to hand off activities to the financial planner instead of the family? That's a great solution to this. So the parent is not managing anymore. There's an impartial third person managing. So that's just one idea. At the very least, caregivers should see to it and help their parents to get their financial files organized. Now, when you see the pile of bills and bank statements, it's so daunting and it causes stress to the whole family. So if a caregiver can get the person to accept help, it'll really be beneficial to get a filing system in order. And it makes it not so overwhelming when you just have a few things to deal with instead of a huge pile. Now, this is also a good time when this organization effort is happening to really get a list of all the accounts that are there and to stay organized and stay on top of things. I also, if we could encourage families to take it one step further, is really have family caregivers make copies or make a file with just the important documents like the will and the trust and the medical directives. That way everything is accessible easily and everybody knows where it's at. So the other thing that we have to talk about when we're talking about money management is when cognitive problems are present. I just want to spend a couple minutes on that. According to dementia experts and victims' family members, the problems are often a lot more serious than forgetting how to balance their checkbook. When people are suffering from dementia, they've looked at their investments, they might have misread how much money they owed in taxes, or they might have bought extra shares instead of selling. There's so many things to consider when dementia is present. And the scary thing is when dementia is present, things happen quickly. The disease progresses quickly, and because it's finances, one error just could be very detrimental to the entire estate. So if the families notice that their senior loved one or their parent is starting to be forgetful, or they've gotten that diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, they should work as fast as possible to get financial affairs in orders. We talk to family caregivers at Home Instead all the time in various formats, and especially those that are coping with Alzheimer's disease. This is the one thing that we have heard over and over and over again is I should have gotten a better handle on the finances a lot sooner when I noticed any sort of memory problem, even before diagnosed. So if there's any sign of cognitive issues, to encourage families to have the conversation and get control of the finances sooner, the sooner the better. Okay. Now, Alzheimer's disease is and dementia, they do create a unique challenge, but just seniors themselves have this vulnerable personality to be taken care of as well. And so I do want to spend a few minutes before we turn it over for questions to talk about senior scams and how they can be prevented. So on the next slide, let's just review briefly why these seniors are targets. Now, there's a number of national organizations and law enforcement agencies that talk about why seniors are target, and availability is probably the first on everybody's list. Seniors are seen as a target because they are retired, they're less mobile, they're at home for the calls, for example, they're at home when somebody can drop by, knock on the door, and try to sell them something. And scam artists know that, and that's what they're looking for, unfortunately. Another reason is isolation. Because they live alone, maybe they've had their spouse pass away, and because their families aren't, living at home anymore, they don't have a lot of interaction with others as with their loved ones as much as they used to, and they're isolated at home. They're not in the community as much as they used to be. They're not getting out as much as they used to be. Loneliness is a result of isolation, and because of this, senior friendships can be limited. This can also make them vulnerable to that friendly cold caller or the person who just knocks on the door and drops by the house. So some of these scams, these people, what they do is they act like they want to be the person's friend, or they say they're new to the neighborhood and they want to make new friends. So they even prey on that loneliness and that vulnerability. Now, sickness is another concern. Chronic health issues means that seniors might have difficulty maintaining their property, for example, or inside of their home. So scam artists know that, and you can pick that out. If you're driving down the street and you're a scam artist and you notice a yard that's got a lot of weeds and not mowed, or a sidewalk cracking, that might be a cue that a senior lives here, and maybe that they could go in and help the person and scam them. Because what happens sometimes is these workers, they charge them to do a simple job. They charge them much more money than they typically would. And dementia, again, can even make that problem worse. Now, money is one of the most notable reasons for senior vulnerability. Scammers see them as a supply of wealth that includes homes, property, life savings, lots of different assets, and they have excellent credit, so they're always easily approved for financing. So again, another major reason why seniors are targets. And then we've got to go to the personality. A lot of our seniors are very polite and very trusting. They keep their composure with callers and visitors, and they really have a hard time saying no, and they're uncomfortable when they have to ask questions. And when my grandmother was alive, I saw that all the time when she would get a cold caller. She would listen and listen and listen. I would say, just hang up, because that's what our generation does. We just hang up. We don't even say we're not interested anymore. We're just done. But that wasn't her. That was her personality. That was her manners. That's how she was raised, and that's how that generation was raised. So they're very, very polite and trusting. And the FBI tells us that these seniors are less likely to report fraud because they don't know who to report it to, and they're embarrassed and ashamed. And lots of times the sad thing is they don't even know that they were scammed. Okay? So again, so hard to hear all of this is why seniors are their target. But let's look at just a few examples on the next slide of some common fraud examples so that we can, make families more aware of these. And the first one is prizes and sweepstakes scams. Sorry, that was hard to say right now. Seniors are told that they've won a sweepstakes, and all they need to do is send a check to cover the taxes. I'm not kidding you. Today I got a call on my cell phone that said I want to cruise to the Bahamas, and all I had to do was take a survey. Now, of course, I hung up on this unknown caller that came over my phone, but that's when a senior sees that, they think they've won a trip to the Bahamas, and they might take the survey and understand it may ask for credit card information later to cover taxes and money, a deposit or whatever, and that's going to, it's obviously a scam, so they're going to get scammed out of that money. Home improvement frauds. We talked about that on the last slide, how that's one of the things that people look for is they may be offered to fix a driveway and they paint it black and charge it senior $3,000. Or they upfront pay for a roof to be fixed and they never see the repairman again. Phishing schemes, seniors might receive a call from someone claiming to represent a bank, and they need their financial information, and then they give that personal information, and the rest is history. So the credit cards and the accounts will be compromised. There's internet fraud. That's just another thing where when you're unfamiliar, if you get an email or you're on the internet and maybe you're shopping or whatever and you put your credit card in where you shouldn't, that's just another thing to be aware of, and it's another thing that happens to seniors. And then identity theft. Identity theft is happening all over the country and to all ages of people, but it's with seniors, again, they can be tricked into sharing Social Security numbers and birth dates, and financial history to these thieves that do these things. So understanding those common scams are important so that we can just be aware and tell families about these to be on the lookout and know what the top scams are. But let's talk about how we can help families to protect their loved one from being a victim of these scams. On the next slide. Now, according to the National Council on Aging, there's many steps, and the first one is really helping seniors understand the need to be aware of the risk and of the scams. Now, there's a fine line between scaring and warning. I think when it comes to my grandma, my aunt might have scared her a little bit instead of warning, but she just was a little bit more nervous to answer the door as she got older, and that's okay. But it's just one of those to really help them understand what could possibly happen out there. Another thing is to stay connected with the families and friends, with religious organizations, the church, and social groups. It's really going to help avoid. The third suggestion is to tell solicitors on the phone that they want everything in writing. So if they're interested in the offer, whatever it is, tell them they want it in writing. And then the family can help do an evaluation on the offer. Shredding documents is another key task. Again, a caregiver can help with these things. Make sure to shred all important documents and make sure that information is properly shredded and in the garbage. Let's continue on the next slide, some extra tips. The do not call list, very important. It's donotcall.gov. It's twice a year that you can sign up for this. And I like to schedule it around key events like it's part of spring cleaning or it's a New Year's Day activity. We just call and get on the list again. And families can do that for seniors as well. We always want to encourage seniors to use direct deposit for benefit checks. That's another tip. Also reminding seniors just to never give out the personal information over the phone unless they're the ones who initiated the call. And then always be skeptical of unsolicited offers. Just take the time to be informed consumers. Okay. On the next slide, let's look at what to do if a caregiver suspects that there is a scam. And these are, contacting the local law enforcement agency. I think a lot of people are nervous to call the police about something like this, but it's absolutely the first thing that a family should do. It doesn't mean just because it may not be an emergency, it's still important to make sure that the police are aware of the situation. And then contacting the bank accounts and credit card companies if anything's been compromised. That's the next step, of course, canceling cards and stopping payments. You can also initiate a fraud alert, and FBI on the FBI government site, or the financial institution will initiate a fraud alert. So if anything becomes, like if a thief tries to access the account again, it won't go through because there's a fraud alert on it. And then contacting the Better Business Bureau, so important. Though the Better Business Bureau in everybody's area really keeps up on like scams that are happening right now. If there's anything to be worried about, there's a lot of tips. There's also senior lines usually where you can call and report different things. So that's a very good resource for families to use as well. Okay, so let's close up today by looking at the different resources that all of you can pass on to the families that you work with and hopefully make their life a little bit easier. The Certified Financial Planners, I mentioned that earlier. It's cfp.net. It's a great website with tons of information and lots. Again, you can review financial planners. You can find financial planners on that site. There's also on caregiverstress.com is a great resource website that just has lots of videos and articles and really talks about the issues of financial management. So for other caregivers to talk with other caregivers and learn from other caregivers about it, Caregiver Stress is a great resource. And then Genworth Financial. Genworth.com, that is the cost of care study. They do that every year. They update the numbers every year, so it's up to date. It's a great way for families to really understand how much things cost, what are the options of how to pay for care. So everything we covered today can almost be on a couple of those websites if you use those and hand those out to families. And then AARP, as I mentioned earlier, they have a healthcare cost calculator as well. It's a great site. It's lots of great resources, too, for families. On the next slide, when we're talking about resources, the NCOA has a site called thebenefitscheckup.org, and that's, again, from the National Council on Aging. This site helps to answer some benefit questions and benefit programs. So it can help people figure out how to pay for medications and health care and food utilities and more. AARP also has a similar site about public benefits, and basically you click on the state that you live in, and it shows you the available discounts in that area. Okay? So when we think about helping people to pay for things and medications, that is a part of financial. On the next slide, let's look at some other resources specifically for low income or people that need some extra help. And the first place I always have people go to is the Offices on Aging. They're just a great agencies. They have all of the resources. They're very up on everything that's available in that area. There's also rent and housing options that can be found on HUD.gov. Some different ideas for housing if housing costs are a concern. Utility company discounts. Encourage families to call and ask for a senior or a low-income discount. Those are available with some utility companies. Social Security income, or SSI, it's paid by the Social Security Administration to seniors living below the poverty level. So it does provide additional monthly income. And then there's the food stamps and housekeeping services, the home-delivered meals. Again, a lot of those programs are run out of the area Offices on Aging, so it's a great place to start. Also, health fairs, a lot of health fairs in the community, they provide a lot of that diagnostic screening, blood pressure and cholesterol and all those different important screenings. So encourage people to take advantage of those as well. Also, one more thing another tip is to try bundling products or maybe even switching vendors. So if your insurance company, can you get your car insurance, your house insurance, everything from one spot? Sometimes there's a discount with that, or it may be time to switch car insurance companies or your insurance company to get a better rate. Even a phone company, a new phone company in town might have a better deal. So it's just never be afraid to ask for a better deal. Okay, before we go over to questions, let's just summarize on the last slide everything that we've covered today. Of course, as I always say on a lot of these webinars, communication really is the key, really helping families understand how to talk about these issues using that ACT acronym where they're going to assess, consider, and then talk. Another important point we covered on this webinar was understanding the cost of care, and I think you've got some great resources to share with families. We've talked about the importance of those key documents and reviewed those 5 documents that are so important in a senior's life, and so really important to encourage families to get those in order. We talked about how to put a financial team together, and we've also looked at, again, understanding the warning signs of fraud and some tips on how to avoid fraud. So we've covered so much information today, and I know a lot of you are working with families that this issues. I hope a lot of this information today will help you navigate these issues with families as you move forward. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Steve and open the phone lines up for questions.
Great. Fantastic presentation. Thank you very much, Molly. We've covered a lot of ground here. Let's see. Let's get right into the questions here, Molly.
Okay.
So the first one here, can you elaborate a little bit on the difference between a will and a living trust and the beneficiary parts?
Yes, and I first want to say that I really do encourage families to visit with financial planners on this because I'm not a certified financial planner. But with living trusts, those are usually for people that have a lot of money, a lot of property, big estates, and it's a lot to manage. And so when you just talk about the differences between a trust and a will, I look at it as a trust is for somebody with lots and lots of money, millionaires, those types of people. So the difference between those two are just the amount of assets and the types of assets. When I was talking about the beneficiaries, that's more about who gets what when the person dies. And everybody thinks that the will is the document that covers all. Well, there's documents out there, for example, beneficiary documents on insurance policies that trump the will or that are first in line before the will. So when a family has to go to court or has to go settle everything after the person's passed away, the order in which they proceed in handing out the assets is first they look at beneficiaries on those important documents like insurance and property and things like that. So even though the person's put a will in place, those documents supersede the will, if that makes sense. Now, again, I don't have all the ins and outs and all the cases of when it supersedes the will. That's why you would definitely need to check with a financial planner to make sure. But that's why I gave out that website. My financial planner, I've actually talked to two of them before this webinar, and they both said on that website there's some great information around that topic too. But any financial planner will know those basic rules.
Okay, great. And wanted to share a couple tips from some of our attendees. This is part of what we like to do, too, is sharing the information. First one here, Federal Trade Commission has a great new program called Pass It On to fight financial elder abuse. If you go to the FTC website, you can find out about it there, and there are also free materials available. So, again, one of our attendees had said the FTC website, and they have a new program, Pass It On, about fighting.
Pass It On. Okay, I'm jotting that one down. That's a great one. No, I have not heard about that, but I will do some research on that. Thank you for whoever sent that in.
Okay, yeah, and another quick one here. Just a reminder that quote-unquote soft fraud and scams can be perpetrated by established well-known companies such as utilities, cable companies, and insurance companies, et cetera, by selling unnecessary premium services and creating complicated processes to cancel and get reimbursed. Have you had any experience with that?
That is a great tip. I've not heard it been called soft frauds before, but that I will definitely start to use that term. That is a great tip. I have heard of that. I just have not heard it been called soft fraud. So thank you for whoever sent that one in, too. That's a great point. That's why when we talk about the financial management team, having more than one person involved to avoid some of the upselling is what I usually call it. That's why that's so important. It's sort of a checks and balance system. So the same thing goes, you're right, with different utility companies, cable companies, your phone company, all of those things. So that is a great point. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, next question here. Molly, you were talking about how some of the services that around financial planning, and the question is, how are these services paid for? Is it after the will has gone through probate and everything is settled?
I think, so a family, they pay for the financial planner up, if you have a financial advisor, you're usually paying for them up front, but the way that those systems usually work, in my experience, is that they're just getting a percentage of the money that you've invested with them or that you're working with them. But so I don't know if they're trying to ask afterwards, is that when somebody gets paid out? That could be, that could very well be that way. It just sort of depends on how the family sets up the account. So maybe they don't even use a financial planner, but at the end, when the executor of the will and if the attorneys there and a financial planner are there and they're distributing everything, then yes, and that's when they would get paid out naturally, and whoever the executor would pay them out, and it's probably in the will. But I think that depends on the family and the situation and the lawyer and the attorney and who wrote that up.
Okay. Molly, we have just about reached the end of our hour, and so unfortunately we're out of time here, but I want to thank you for a fantastic presentation and for sharing all of this very pertinent information with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for joining today.